Now, now how did racism come into existence? Racism never existed on this earth. It never existed on this earth until the 1500s. You never had racism on the earth. Racism came into existence when 9 European nations, when Arab Middle Easterners and some Asians all of a sudden decided that they wanted to enrich themselves by building colonies in the newly discovered world, which was the Americas. South America, North America, and Latin America. They got into a contest. In the 1400s, Europe was decimated. It was being devastated by poverty, disease, famine, and crime. And Europe wanted to lift itself. And they found out that way back in 1442, when the Pope had been given by Henry the Navigator, given 16 slaves, and they'd used those slaves in the Catholic Church, very productively in the Catholic Church. So by 1488, Pope Innocent put out a public edict, says if you want to enrich yourself and move up, get yourself some slaves out of Africa. And so then all those European countries said that we can lift ourselves off the back of Africa and African resources and African black labor. And so then all the European nations got into a contest, what you all call a race to develop South America, North America, and Central America. That's when the race started. And everybody was taking blacks out of Africa for about $15 to $20 a head and selling them in this country for about a 1,500% profit margin for about $325 each. And they began to enrich themselves. And so racism started. Slavery did not create racism. Racism created slavery. And as we move through it, and slavery and racism are economic issues. They have, and I want to disabuse you of any misconceptions. It has nothing in the world to do. Racism has nothing in the world to do with getting along with people. It has nothing in the world to do with bias, bigotry, hatred, or discrimination, or prejudice. Those things have nothing to do with racism. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing to own and control resources and wealth and power. And once they acquire a significant amount of it, they then use it against another group to enslave them, to discriminate, to shut them out, and tell them who they can marry, whether or not they can go to school, or to maldistribute the educational funds for the schooling of another child. That's what racism is. It is a competitive relationship, and it's economic based. It started out as economics in the 1500s, and by the 1700s, it switched over and became a religious issue. It became a religious issue in the 1700s as the evangelical movement moved across America. And they wanted some justification for what they were doing to black folk, about how they were enslaving. And so then they had, the Bible was modified. The King Edward version was modified. They started telling me, use certain scriptures in here to justify the enslavement of black folk. And to teach black folk, to use the Bible to hold some of them enslaved. And so that a slave would not revolt if he thought he was revolting against God. And teach him that he is to be obedient and humble and to work hard and be hardworking and to look for pie in the sky after death. And they used it. So at that time, slavery became a religious issue. And it stayed a religious issue all the way up until about 1859, 1 year before the Civil War, 2 years before the Civil War broke out. At that time, Charles Darwin wrote a book, or rather a scripture he calls The Survival of the Fittest, and the survival of the species. And what he did in there, drew some lineages saying if an elephant is bigger than a mouse, and a mouse is bigger than an amoeba, there's a vertical line between a tree and grass, and the highest is always superior to the lowest. And in doing that analysis, he says that since whites now, as a result of slavery, whites have acquired almost 100% ownership of everything, then obviously they are superior to black folk, the slave who owns nothing. And at that point in 1859, the issue changed then from an economic or religious issue, it became a biological issue. And then after that point on up until the present time, they started putting on your driver's license, on your birth certificate, what race you belong to. And at that time, see, the dominant society had acquired almost 99%, or not 100%, control of everything. And so the dominant society was on a mountain and black folk were in the ditch. The dominant society had received everything and controlled everything, the black person in the ditch. So what they did then, they took the word race, R-A-C-E. They took the word race, they cut the E off the end of it, and they stuck on a suffix. The suffix is ISM. ISM is a suffix that means maintain the prevailing conditions. Let nothing change. And they stuck ISM on. That's what racism is. Racism means that now that whites own and control everything and blacks own nothing, keep it that way. And that prevailed all the way up through the civil rights movement in 1960, which means that anybody who accepts the racist philosophies, it's not about who's superior, it's about who owns and controls. Therefore, the philosophy is be conservative. Let nothing move from white hands to black hands. That is racism. Let nothing move from white hands to black hands. So consequently, the dominant society developed these philosophies that say, I'm opposed to reparation, I'm opposed to affirmative action, I'm opposed to set-asides and preferential treatment for black folk, because that would put them in a position to get resources and ownership and control.